BEPS Action Plan 13 and starting 2016, US, UK, Ireland, Australia, France, most of the countries have formulated the necessary laws or regulation in their legislation, and the country by country reports would be filed starting 1st January 2006 for the period starting 1st January 2016, and therefore first set of country by country reports should be available by 2017, in the year 2017, and the tax administration of other jurisdictions would, once it is filed with one jurisdiction of one tax jurisdiction tax administration with one of one country, the other countries would have access to those information. So as we have seen, the proposed reporting requirement as per BEPS Action 13 are some kind of KYC exercise for the tax administration, and which would provide the tax authorities useful tool for risk assessment in relation to transfer pricing. Internationally, these requirements of CBC reporting is seen as a game changer and MNEs are anticipating more focused inquiries from tax department. Also, internationally, what we have seen that the entities MNEs are circumspect about the information, such information of the entire group being made available to aggressive tax administration in emerging economy, which are known to be harsh during the tax audits, and they anticipate the fresh round of litigation on this account. It is also anticipated that culling out this information would not be so easy, and they cannot be made on the basis of merely consolidated financial account. It may require incurring additional costs by making changes in the ERP. So the companies have to be gearing up to do these to implement these BEPS action plan.
This may mean enhanced compliance requirements,
huge enhanced compliance requirement
and costs also for taxpayers.
Yes. So in one of the conferences which I was attending, one of the US corporation, IT head of that US corporation was quoting phenomenal cost which was involved in implementing or making necessary changes in the ERP for one of the divisions, and the cost which was involved in implementing the changes across the group was prohibitive.
And I think the other thing that I fear is the kind of onus that the Indian revenue will put on you to get information from your parent group entity. Now, especially in a case where India does not have a treaty for exchange of information, how can the Indian entity get hold of the information of the parent entity? You put that responsibility and burden on the Indian company, which is only a part of the MNE group. I think that there are bound to be disputes on this, to the extent of burden of proof and the onus.
You see, if implementation of the exchange of information agreement is suspended, or it is not actually being honored by the other country, then the onus automatically is on the taxpayer here.
No, here, but how do you discharge it?
Yeah, that's the difficulty. That's it.
Especially in a situation where CBC requirement is not there in the other country. You may have a situation where they may not have adopted these recommendations.
Well, look at Cyprus, for instance. Yes. You brought in section 94A, yes, notified Cyprus as a notified jurisdictional area on the grounds that they are not cooperating on exchange of information.
Right.
Now, let us say the group is headquartered in Cyprus, and you are just a constituent of the group.
Right.
To ask the taxpayer in India to get information relating to the group,
yes,
I think it's an almost tall order.
Absolutely.
And if these information could not be obtained by the Indian resident and therefore the compliance could not be made, it will be huge penalty
The penalty apart, the adjustment that may be made.
and the adjustment that can be made. Then there are certain amendments to the time limit for passing orders by the transfer pricing
I
officer.
think take it as read.
Yeah, so and so this this brings me to the end of my presentation. Now I pass it on to Rohit Jain, who will take up provisions related to assessment proceedings.
Good afternoon, friends. I'll be taking 4 parts of this amendment which are proposed in this budget. First of all, I'll be dealing with the assessment proceeding, interest and penalties, income declaration scheme, dispute resolution scheme, and the miscellaneous provisions. So, starting with the assessment proceedings, there are few changes which are proposed in the budget. The first slide refers to the proposed amendments relating to filing of return of income. So the first amendment which they are proposing is that in case of a person who is having the income from capital gains which is otherwise exempt from tax, and if without claiming the benefit of exemption the income exceeds the maximum amount which is not chargeable to tax, then such person would be required to file his return of income. So this is the first amendment. The second amendment actually relates to the amendments under section 139(4), which relates to the belated filing of return of income. Presently, a belated return can be filed within 1 year from the end of relevant assessment year. So, say for example, assessment year 2015-16 is concerned, I can file my belated return up to 31st March 2017, which means 2 years from the end of the relevant, 2 years from the end of the date in which the year ends. So, from March 15, I can file up to March 2017. The amendment which is now proposed is that I can file my belated return only within the relevant assessment year. So for assessment year 2015-16, I will be able to file my belated return up to 31st March 2016. But there is a corresponding amendment in 139(5) also, which is a very welcome amendment in the sense that it says now that presently a belated return cannot be revised. Now what they propose to provide is that even a belated return can be revised, and this return can be revised up to the completion of assessment. So to some extent one can say that presently there is controversy which normally go on, that if the assessment is going on, sometimes I fail to make any claim in my return of income, and I file a revised computation of income before the assessing officer. Now that revised computation of income is ignored by applying the decision of Goetze. Now with this amendment, what I can do is, instead of filing a revised computation of income, I can file my revised return of income prior to the completion of assessment. Thereby the assessing officer would now be bound to consider my revised claim which I make in my revised return of income. So that way this is quite a welcome amendment. And another amendment which is proposed is in section 139(9), that if I file my return of income without payment of self-assessment tax, then also it will not be treated as defective return. So this is another amendment which is proposed. What they are now proposing to provide is that presently the intimation which is required to be, the return which is required to be processed is not mandatory. So sometimes if there are no adjustments to be made to the return of income, normally we do not get any 143(1) intimation. Now it is proposed that in every cases the intimation will have to be issued, the return will have to be processed under 143(1), and it is also now made mandatory that even if a assessment notice, scrutiny notice has also been issued, the current law provides that after the scrutiny notice the return will not be processed and 143(1) intimation will not be issued. But now it is said that even if a scrutiny notice has been issued, a 143(1) intimation has to be issued by the department. So these amendments will apply from assessment year 2017-18 onwards, so from the next year.
Rohit, will you get the refund on processing of intimation?
Yes.
Today there is a bar. Today you can't get a refund if you have a scrutiny notice, no?
That has been done away with.
No, that is also done away with.
Yeah.
Now if I have a return which is processed, So I'll get a refund.
They have to not necessarily process
Okay.
before completing the assessment.
Now, the scope of 143.1, which is basically processing of the return, is intended to be widened by providing for certain more adjustment which can be made in a 143.1 intimation, which includes the disallowance of claim of set-off of loss, where a return for the earlier year has not been filed within the time limit, disallowance of expenditure as indicated in the audit report, but not made in the return. Now this can be controversial because just because some disallowance is proposed in the audit report, that may not necessarily follow that it has to be disallowed for the purpose of the tax. I can still make a claim contrary to what is provided in the audit report that the amount is not to be disallowed. But now the proposed amendment says that whatever is provided in the audit report, in the process while processing the return, and necessary adjustment can be made. Then another adjustment can be made is disallowance of deduction under section disallowance of various deductions where the return of income is not filed. So for example, if I don't file a return in time, then I am not eligible for deduction under section 80IA. So while processing my return, the entire deduction which I might have claimed in my belated return will be denied in a 143.1 return. Then the addition of income appearing form 26AS and form 16A, if not included in the return, will have to be adjusted. This is another amendment which is proposed. In fact, this may lead to litigation in the sense that sometimes in form 26AS, there may be certain amounts which may be mentioned, which I may not have included in my return of income because that may not be taxable in that particular year. Now with this processing and the widening of the scope of 143.1, there will be dispute with regard to the amounts which are mentioned in 143.1 and not included in my return of income. Normally this reconciliation is always sought for during the course of my scrutiny assessment. So now this will have to be gone through in a 143.1 proceedings also. And all these adjustments, if it has the effect of any upward adjustment, then an opportunity in accordance with the principles of natural justice, an opportunity of hearing has to be provided to the assessee. These are some of the time limitations which are sought to be changed. Broadly, we have tabulated it, it can be gone through. Broadly, what they have done is they have reduced the time limit for completion of assessment by 3 months. What is important to be seen is the next slide. There are certain cases where there is presently no time limit provided for passing an order. For example, to give effect to an appellate order, presently there is no time limit for passing an order to give effect to an appellate order. What is now sought to be provided is that the assessing officer will have to pass a consequential order within 3 months from the end of the month in which the order is received or passed. Again, there may be some issues as to whether if I give a copy of the order of the appellate authority to the assessing officer and request him to give effect to that order, whether the timelines for 3 months will start from that date or from the date on which he actually officially received the copy of the order, his copy of the order from the appellate authority. Because normally what the assessing officer tend to do is they only give the appeal effect to the order of the appellate authority once they receive their respective copy from the appellate authority. But at least this is a welcome amendment that now a 3 months time limit has been prescribed, and this has actually been linked with the interest on refund also, because what they have now proposed is if the assessing officer delays in passing a consequential order, you will be entitled to another additional interest of 3% per annum for the period during which he delays in giving effect to the order of the appellate authority.
And also the finance minister stated in his speech that part of interest will be recovered from the assessing officer or the official who delays it. So it is of course not part of the
Not
finance
part of,
bill, but it is there. So
Correct.
there will internally some administrative instructions to that effect. So this is to have some kind of accountability also on the officials so they don't deliberately delay the refund.
Well, this is otherwise a very welcome amendment because now they will have to necessarily pass an order. The assessing officer, what they presently do is they sometimes don't give effect to the appellate order so that they don't have to issue the refunds. So now this is a very welcome amendment in that sense. Again, there are certain cases where some finding or direction is given in the order of an appellate authority, but that finding or direction do not require a fresh assessment order to be passed. Presently, there is no time limit for giving effect to that finding or direction. Now, the time limit which is sought to be included is 12 months from the end of the month, in which the respective order, in which that finding or direction is contained, is received by the concerned authority. So this again is sought to provide a limitation for passing an order to give effect to any finding or direction. These are again these similar corresponding amendments have been made in 153 capital B, which basically provides for time limit for passing an order consequent to the search and seizure operation. Again here also the 3 months are sought to be reduced for passing a order under section 153A as well as 153C, which we have tabulated in our presentation. Now going forward, coming to the interest and penalties. Now a major change has been made in so far as I'll come to the penalty portion. Before that, I'll this amendment, this is regarding the applications which have to be disposed of. If you see that under various sections, now the time limitations have been provided for the concerned authority to pass respective orders. Now these are basically the limitations. There are provisions where I can make an application to the concerned authority for waiver of interest which is payable under the provisions of the Act. There was no time limit provided for disposal of that application. So now they provide the time limit has been included for disposing of that application, which is 12 months from the date end of the month in which the application is passed. So this is just for inclusion of the time limit for passing of an order. Now coming to the advance tax payments, presently the first installment, which is June ending installment, is not applicable to people other than corporate. Now what is proposed to be provided is that in every case the assessee would be required to pay installments for 15 June, 15 September, 15 December and 15 March. So an assessee, individual assessee, will also have to make the payment of the first installment, that is ending on 15 June, and the slab rates are kept as same as in case of the corporate assessee. Now coming to the payment of interest on refund, the certain amendments are proposed in section 244A to specifically provide that in case of refunds arising, what they are proposing to do is that presently what we do is, in case I do not file my return of income in time, but I still get a refund out of my TDS or advance tax payments, I am entitled to the refund, to the interest from the 1st April of the relevant assessment year. So even in case of a belated filing of return of income, though the assessing officer in that situation seeks to apply subsection 2 to section 244A to say that in those cases the refund is delayed grant of refund is attributable to the assessee, and therefore for that period when the return is filed belatedly, the interest is not granted. Now the amendment is proposed in the Act itself to provide that in case I do not file my return of income in time under section 1 as provided in 139(1), then I will be allowed interest only from the period commencing from the date on which I file the return of income. So for the period there is a delay in filing the return of income, I will not be eligible for interest under section 244 capital A. The another amendment which is proposed is for self-assessment. There is a specific clause which is sought to be inserted in section 244A to provide the date, to actually provide that even in case of self-assessment tax, the date on which I file my return of income, from that date I will be eligible for interest. In fact, there is a controversy which is presently going on, is whether I am at all eligible for interest on self-assessment tax. And in fact, Mr. Vohra can elaborate. There is recently a special larger bench of the has been constituted in the Delhi High Court to consider the issue as to whether interest is at all payable under section 244A on self-assessment tax.
That's right. I think because of the divergent views in the Delhi High Court, the matter has been referred to a larger bench, a full bench, to decide this controversy whether interest under 244 capital A is payable on refund of self-assessment tax, and if yes, from what date.
So now they have actually incorporated a specific clause to provide that the interest would be payable from the date on which I file my return of income. So that judgment may be applicable to the period prior to the proposed amendment. Now the coming to the penalty provisions, this is quite important in the sense that they seek to completely overhaul the penalty provisions. Presently there are two concepts in penalty. One is the concept of concealment and the second is the furnishing of inaccurate particulars. Now these two concepts are sought to be totally done away with, and the two new concepts are sought to be brought, which are underreporting of income and misreporting of income. So now the penalty will be leviable if you either underreport the income or underreporting is of such a nature that it constitutes misreporting of income. Now there is an exhaustive list which has been provided in the proposed amendment as to what would constitute underreporting of income and what would constitute misreporting of income, and the list of underreporting of income includes where the income is determined under 143(1) is more than income assessed is more than the income returned or determined under 143(1), where the income assessed is greater than the basic exemption limit where you don't file the return of income, where the income assessed is greater than the income. So ultimately what boils down to it, that if your income ultimately assessed is more than the income which you have returned or which is processed under 143(1), that will be treated as underreporting of income. And in case you do not file your return of income and your income is found to be over the maximum amount which is not chargeable to tax, then that amount will be treated as underreported income. Now in case of what constitutes misreporting of income is defined to mean that underreporting of income would be treated as misreporting in the following cases. Now, this is quite important. It says first, misrepresentation or suppression of facts, which is quite proper in the sense that this actually would constitute misreporting of income. Second is non-recording of investment in books of accounts, that would automatically constitute misreporting of income. Claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. Now this is quite ambiguous because it says claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. So sometimes there may be a bona fide dispute as to whether an expenditure which is claimed by me is substantiated by an evidence, because I may claim that my expenditure is substantiated by evidence which I placed on record before the authorities. The authority may have a different view. They may hold that no, the evidence which you have brought in record is not sufficient enough to substantiate the expenditure. So this will be an issue which will lead to lot of litigation as to whether the expenditure